Hello and welcome to another episode of Page Burners. We work our way through the Malazan books in publication order by both authors Steven Erikson and Ian Esselmont. We're currently working our way through Deadhouse Gates, the second book in the Malazan Book of the Fallen series by Steven Erikson. We are reading approximately 100 pages from the mass market paperback editions every week. We are on the second discussion for Deadhouse Gates, so we're reading chapters. We're talking about chapters 3 through 5. For next week, we'll be discussing chapters 6 and 7. I guess the week after that, we'll probably go straight through to the end of book 2, which is called Whirlwind. So, yeah, with me, I have Steve and Shannon, who will introduce themselves in just a second. And my name is Varsha. I always forget to say that, and Carl demands that I do. And here he is. Hey, Carl. And I run the YouTube channel Reading by the Rainy Mountain. Steve, could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Steve from Steve Talks Books on YouTube and Pagechewing, the podcast. Happy to be here. I love Deadhouse Gates, although there are some things that I'm not quite sure about what happened. There's times I feel like I know what's going on, and then we hit a patch of what what happened. So hopefully you guys can help me through that.
And I am Carl, and I was late, and I'm happy to be here now.
Good timing.
Sorry, for some reason I thought we were recording at 7:30. So.
Oh, yeah, I should have sent a reminder. I broached the subject last week, but actually we weren't actually changing schedule yet, or now, never, or not.
Okay.
My name is Shannon, and I'm known from pretty much just here, and I am most excited to talk about Godana's van and the beginning of the uprising that we see there.
Nice. I forgot to do that. Can we also go around again and talk about the thing we're most excited to talk about, Godana's van? Mine is the octagonal gate to the Path of Hands thing that Icarium and Mapo discover, and on a related note, the ritual that Sormo Inath conducts. Basically, I just would like to hash out this Path of Hands business. Steve.
I am most interested in talking about. We just discussed the pronunciation Felicin. Felicin. I'm most interested in discussing that character because it's one of my favorites from this book. Anyway, I don't know how much she's in the rest of the series, but I think it's a fascinating character and all the different opinions. But yeah, we'll get into that.
And I will say Felicin until my dying day. No, I love her too. I loved her on my first read through, and then I found out that people hated her, and she's a really controversial character, and I was like, damn, that sucks. I mean, I get it, because she is very unlikable at times. You know, I think maybe I'm most excited to talk about the Path of Hands as well, because I think I'm much more into it this time through than I was my first time through, where I was kind of lost about what all was going on there. And I think having an understanding makes it much more interesting to me.
Very nice. Yeah, Path of Hands into 2. Carl stole my thing. No, I'm just kidding.
I did. Yes, adjunct.
And yeah, I guess the chapter 3 starts with Felicin and Bennett and some difficult stuff since we've last seen her, which was in the prologue, right? So should we just get straight into that topic then?
Let's do it.
All right. Steve, since you wanted to talk about Felicin, do you want to start?
Yeah, well, I think so. What strikes me with this is just where we start off in chapter 3 with her, and just the way that she's a survivor, and she does what she can to survive, and she also helps her friends, but she doesn't have to, and they both be dead if not for her. So I just love the fact that she's going through what she's going through. She's doing what she can to survive, just to just not even the next day, just hour to hour, minute to minute, and all that she endures to survive, and still is helping her friends that start to kind of exclude her from their plans. I just think it's a fascinating story. Just her journey. And we've only seen a little bit of it, but yeah, I just love her character, that she is just surviving and all that she goes through and just continues to survive.
It's such a complex, emotionally difficult storyline, particularly at the point where we're at right now with Felison and Haboric in particular, where I think I reading the section, like, we're in her head, we see how she's trying to support them. She is literally keeping them alive, and Haboric in particular, and he comes across as very patronizing, I think, from her point of view. But at the same time, like, I think if you sit back and think, like, if you've ever loved anyone or cared about anyone who is an addict, who's addicted to something, and watching them kind of self-destruct, even if you can understand maybe why they're doing it, it is painful, and he still cares for her and takes care of her in the moments where it really matters. But it's one of those situations where I don't know that there is a right sort of way to feel about it, or a a clean, neat moral there. I mean, because God, she's 15 years old, right? She's selling her body to survive, to help her friends, and then for drugs, which I think she views as part of her survival. But I think, that is certainly something you can debate. And it's just brutal. It's really bleak and heavy stuff, amidst, a book that is not particularly light. But it to me stands out as a particularly, just because of how real it is. It just feels so. I think, again, like, very relatable, like, even in the modern day, dealing with maybe not so much the slavery aspect, but the addiction and the kind of the struggle of, like, trying to get through every day. It's tough.
I think. Sorry, go ahead, Shannon.
Oh, well, I was going to respond to Carl and say, he was surprised that on his first read through to find out people hated Felison. I was one of those people. Like, I despised her on my first read through. I could not empathize with her. And so that's one of my goals of this reread, is to see if I can empathize with this character, because it is terrible. I mean, terrible things happen to her, and she reacts probably as a 15-year-old drug addict would react. And so I was talking with Steve earlier, right before we were recording, and yeah, like, I think, right here in chapter 3 at the beginning of it, we see I have a hard time with this shift of her character, where she goes from, at the beginning of the chapter, she's selling herself to I can never remember this guy's name, Bennett, and she's protecting Haboric and stuff and doing this, and then by the end of the chapter, she's just kind of like, because I think it's a combination of Haboric's not grateful enough that she's done this for him, and he's being too judgmental, and then Bauden comes back and they're talking and leaving her out of the conversation, and so she kind of, like, just turns all of a sudden at the end of this chapter. I mean, there's even a line, it says, "I'm all alone. There's just Benneth now, Benneth and his wine and his durang and his body." And like, that's the moment where she just changes, and then the next time we see her, she's just full out, strung out drug addict. And we'll talk about, I guess, that when we get to it. But like, I don't know, like, it's a big shift in the character, and I guess it's the drugs that change her so much. Because the next time we see her, she's just starts being just rude and awful, and kind of the Felison I remember for my first read through. And I get it now, I think, a little bit more. But yeah, the first time I read her, I hated this character.
I think, given her situation, if she didn't make the choices she's made, she'd be dead.
Well, not just her. Haboric would be dead.
They'd all be dead. Yeah,
Bennett would probably be okay, or not Bennett. Bauden would be okay, but both her and Heroic would be dead by now.
I think that is a very real possibility. I mean, particularly with Heboric. I think what's difficult though is she's an unreliable narrator, and she is a drug addict, and so it's hard to tell how much is actually necessary and how much is her as this deeply damaged girl, and she is a girl. She's 15. Justifying her actions. And that's where I feel like it is this real gray area, right? Where, like, again, like, if you know or have ever known addicts or dealt with it yourself, addiction yourself, it's hard sometimes where the addiction does change people's behavior oftentimes and kind of take over their life. And particularly if it's like a substance that actively, rewires your brain, like where you're kind of everything is about getting the next hit, the next high. It's they often do become unpleasant, particularly if things, when confronted with judgment about the addiction. But at the same time, judgment is often not the best way to handle people with addiction, like that. I think is something we know very well now in the present day, and that it's, you come to people and just tell them, like, kind of like a classic scolding parent, like, I didn't raise you to be like this, like, what are you doing, like, you're just destroying yourself. Like, that's not going to help. Like, I think there's you maybe need a little bit of that, but like at the same time, Hiboric could certainly try to reach out more. And I think what does make him kind of come across as patronizing is we don't really see him trying to do that as much. He just kind of scolds her, and at the same time, he's very, like, he does take care of her too, right? As we see later in the chapter when she's beaten, he seeks her out, and and that's what is so moving, but also so difficult about this section for me is just the range of the ethical reality of it and the emotional complexity.
Yeah, I mean, the last time we see her in chapter 3, she's given herself over just to the drugs and Bennett, and then chapter 4 starts off with Bennett, completely abandoning her and beating her, and I mean, it all just falling apart. And then Hiboric tries to come back, but she's already kind of, I guess at that point she's an addict and she's already kind of gone. Like, it's too little too late, I guess.
Yeah, well, I think kind of the way, just really quickly, I think the reason why she's using drugs is because she's self-medicating she's going from being a nobleborn to being enslaved to having to do these things just to stay alive. I think, just the amount of change she's gone through in a very short period of time. I don't know. I think she has to kind of forget, otherwise she'll probably go mad. But go ahead, Varsha. Sorry.
No. Yeah. So I think, well, she believes that they would all have not survived without her, and it seems that at least Heboric thinks otherwise. But then he also accepts what food she brings for him, for instance. So he has this air of judgment, yes. And like the two interactions with Heboric are very interesting with regards to Felicin. Like, it's unclear whether they would have, if she is in fact protecting them. I think she is, at least with the carts and stuff, like getting Heboric a change of job and stuff. I think that is important, and she's definitely protecting him and all the things that she's doing. And it's unclear whether the others recognize and acknowledge what she's doing for them. And at least Heboric, when he for all his judgment, he's accepting of her. And it's also not super clear, the judgment is coming from a place of compassion. I think we were talking about earlier before we were recording, like, it seems to be a certain style of parenting, right? Like, Carl, you also mentioned, it's like the kind that chooses to use shaming as the mechanism to say, please don't do this, but it's coming out of a place of concern. And Felicin is clearly not able to see that, because I think the kindest thing you can do for her is to bring compassion and not judgment. And being left out, I guess, yeah, I didn't really quite make that connection, but that makes sense, that being left out of the interaction between Borden and Heboric probably drove her to the edge of deciding to bury herself and numb herself. But also I think, I don't remember if we got any monologues in the second chapter with Felicin after she has given over herself, but we did. But those were all her desperately trying to remember that she needs to bring back important information to Heberic, if I remember correctly. So like she's fighting her senses, but I wonder if we got any sensibility out of her in those moments. They would probably seem just as vulnerable as they were in the third chapter, where she's lashing out and being cruel to Heberic, even in that chapter. But within her own mind, she's wondering if she's just helping him so that she can hurt him. And she cries when they leave her out. So I think that vulnerability is not gone in the Felicin we meet in chapter 4, the when she's like completely buried under her addiction. It's just easy to think that it is because of how she behaves. And I think that's something important to carry with us through the rest of the book.
Absolutely. And, I mean, talking about vulnerability, this is a child who is trying to find a sense of agency and control in a situation where she is literally a slave. Like that's why she effectively, sells her body, well, basically from the get-go. Aboard the ship, she mentions she started opening her legs to the sailors, and it, that she got some reward out of it, right? Where they got moved on the ship to a cleaner section so they didn't get diseased and die. And, she gets rewards, whether it's drugs or, medicine for her boric or whatever. It is her kind of taking control of her situation. And I think that is something that is, when you take a step back, even though she does it in the way she does, I think it is something that is relatable and understandable. Like when you have no agency day to day, like you're gonna find whatever ways you can to take control of your situation. And so, whether that means, selling your body for different things, deciding to take drugs to kind of feel better, even briefly, or, whatever. It's just very human. And, I don't think I would handle the situation any better than she would. It just knowing my own worst instincts, and it's just a tough position. Making she's 15, like that's crazy. That's one of the things that I think is so often overlooked. But even then, I think there are many fully grown adults who would also find themselves really struggling in that situation. And, at the same time, I think Heboric and Bowden, I understand as like grown adults, that they maybe wouldn't want to include her in all of their decision making. Like that, like from her perspective, that naturally is really frustrating. Do you think like in real life, day to day, like how many grown adults are gonna consult the 15-year-old, especially if she's a 15-year-old drug addict? The
Yeah, I
answer is
think
like, yeah, sorry, go ahead, Shannon.
no, I think you're right, Carl. I mean, I think from like we're all adults from our perspective. I mean, from Bawden and Bork's perspective, I mean, clearly they're up to something. I mean, we see that especially in chapter 4. I mean, Bawden's doing something. I mean, there's some plans in motion. They're just leaving her out of it. And in fact, there's even that guard that stops her and starts talking to her, and she's not getting any. She's not picking up on anything he's saying. He just thinks, she just thinks he wants to have sex with her. But I mean, there's plans in motion, and they're leaving her out because she's a 15-year-old girl. And as an adult. So we would probably leave her out of it because we're like, well, she's a child and we're doing a plan, and we don't want anybody to find out, and she's already kind of compromised with this guy she's hooked up with. And so, but the other side of that is that she sees it as you're leaving me out, and she takes the attitude she takes, which is understandable.
I mean, I don't know. I think from her perspective, she is doing all these things and she's going out of her way to bring them food, to help them, to have them move to places they won't die. And for them to leave her out, if she was saving my life every day, I'd be sure that she's coming with me. I wouldn't leave her out of the plan. At least I wouldn't, may not include her in the plan, but when it's time to go, she's coming with us. Like, I would never leave her behind after she did all she's done for me. And then that's why it's kind of, I can understand why she's pissed.
Do you think they would leave her behind though? Like, I don't think that was ever ever part of the plan. Like, I just think they're not.
I think the guard talking to her and was keying us in that the plan is also she's included in the plan if she doesn't know it.
Yeah, exactly. I think Haboric would go out of his way. Like, I am very much of the mind that part of what makes this so emotionally fraught for me is I feel like Haboric would die for Fellison, but she doesn't understand that. And at the same time, he does condescend to her. Like, he does patronize to her. And that comes out, out of a sense of he genuinely does know better than her. He is wiser than her. He's so much older than her. He sees the way she's self-destructing, but also she's a child, and like all kids do stupid shit. And he could probably be a little more empathetic. She really does need that compassion, that empathy right now, and she's just not getting it, and it's unfortunate. And right, and Haboric is still this mysterious character, right? Like, we don't, and so not to mention Bowden is as well, right? Where they have these pasts we don't know anything about at this point. Haboric, we know, is like an apostate from his faith, the faith of Finner, but beyond that, like, we don't know what happened. We don't know why he is. We know he was a historian, but like, what shaped him into the man he is? What is his view of the world? These are all questions, and I mean, I think really when I get down to the root of it, my feeling is that it's best to kind of, I think we can cast judgment on actions of these characters, but I just think that you have to like come to all of these characters, with that level of, I mean, compassion is like kind of the generic word we talk about when we talk about Malazan, because it is one of the major themes of the series. But with compassion, you got to look at them with compassion. And I've seen people who, to like strike back against the Fellison haters, to then go on and become like Haboric haters. And I don't think that that's the right approach either, because I think he's trying his best, and he cares about her and is trying to help her, and none of them are doing, like classic human beings. They just like aren't doing a very good job communicating how they feel and what their intent is, right? I mean, it's not like Fellison comes up to him and is like, I don't think you appreciate the things I'm doing for you. It's not like she has a healthy conversation with him about it. She's just like stewing and like brooding and like, I hate you. And similarly, Hebwork is not like telling her like, I'm really worried about you, and like, I don't know how to express to you that I think you're hurting yourself, not helping yourself. He's just like, this is bad, lass. Like, you have to stop. Like, I know how this ends, and it's poorly for you, and and it's like that's like great, but like that's only going to go so far with her.
Yeah, I think that moment when she says she's unable to sleep without Durhang, and he wants her to get some rest after being beat up by that guy, and he offers to make her tea. I think the pauses, and in that moment when Heboric, like, you can see him deciding what to do and how to help her, and you can see him fighting with himself to do what he thinks is not going to help her, but also will help her in just the moment, like trying to weigh the short term versus the long term there. So he is also very much doing the best he can for her, I think. And yeah, it is just painful all around. And just one more thing that I wanted to bring up is she thinks to herself that she discovered on the ship that it she can get favors in exchange for sex, right? And I doubt that she was the one who initiated it. I bet someone gave her attention, and then she decided she can get things out of it, like against like being noticed for being beautiful. We're told several times that she is beautiful, and uh, being noticed for that must have she must have like sort of reimagined her place in the world and said, okay, I have something I can use, versus instead of being helpless before. So it all, the way it is phrased, it almost felt like it originated from her, but now I think about it, probably not. So she's been exploited right from the beginning. She's just seeing some agency through it all and maybe trying to get something out of it. So yeah, judgment would probably be the last place to go for her.
I think that's a great point. There's no way she just instinctively was like, I'm going to trade my body for favors without, almost certainly the men around her who had her in captivity coming on to her, or, at the very least, like making lewd comments about her body, right? Introducing the idea that, oh, wait, there's something I can do here, and I think you're right that, like, as a teenager, I mean, I don't even think you have to be a child for this to happen, but, like, certainly as a child, it's particularly affecting that it fundamentally changed the way she viewed herself and the world and her relationship to the world. I mean, that's why when the guard talks to her, she thinks, oh, he just wants to have sex with me, because that's how she views herself and her relationship with other people, particularly men, that she's like, I am a sex object to them. They want to sleep with me. That is it. That is all they see when they look at me. And for some people, that's true, right? Like with Bennett, it seems like the only reason he cares about her is because she's a pretty young thing. And it's sad. It's really sad.
Yeah, and all that said, like I think she is difficult to like as a person or as a character. It is just that we sort of have to dig deep, and I think that's what the book and the story sort of makes us do. Makes us go that extra level and think beyond what's just how they are interacting with each other, right? And
I
on the
agree.
sorry, go ahead.
Oh,
No,
I
go
mean,
ahead. Go ahead.
I agree with what you just said. I think, it's like I can pity Felicen very easily, but I know Erikson very wants us to go deeper and empathize with her more, and
Mm.
that's the kind of harder part for me. But I think you guys are talking me into it a little bit. I'm getting it a little bit more.
It is tough though. Like I get it. Like because she is. I think the thing that ultimately like cuts through to me is that she is a child. But that said, she is like incredibly unpleasant and only gets more unpleasant, towards the end of this book. By book, I mean like Act 1, Raraku or whatever Part 1 is called. And it's, she is mean to Haborik, and she is a drug addict, and she, has clearly lost control of herself and is self-destructing, and it's not something that makes you go, oh yeah, like this person's awesome, like I want to read about them all day, like, or rather I think they're like the coolest, most likable person. Like, no, she is unpleasant, but that's kind of the difficulty, right? Is, she's not unpleasant for no reason, and yeah, there's just a lot going on there.
On a slightly related subject, on the subject of the guard and the message he's trying to send her, is he trying to tell her to ask Heberick for something, for some information? Because he brought up Duiker, and the other historian we know of is Heberick, and he's quoting a historian.
I honestly, at this point, I don't remember what happens well enough to be able to give you a confident answer about what's going on there. I don't know Shannon or Steve, you have a better idea, but I don't distinctly remember. I mean, clearly the guard is like in on something, but what exactly is unclear to me at this point.
I agree. I don't quite remember exactly what's about to happen, but I think we'll find out in the next chapter or two.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, when she had that interaction with the guard, I thought it was like I think he was kind of propositioning her. I didn't know that it was a wink and a nod. I thought it was more of they saw her as a piece of meat and not as a person, but maybe I missed that one.
I mean, I think because that's what she thinks, and I think she's wrong, and I think that it's the second interaction that really makes that clear, because I think the first one is kind of ambiguous, but it's when he's like, "Hey, did you read that thing I was telling you to read, girl?" Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Like I think that's when it becomes clear that like he's trying to communicate with her about something that he can't say explicitly, and it's not, "I want to have sex with you." Like there's some sort of additional, whether or not it's altruistic, or noble. Like I think there is a different kind of motive going on there.
Yeah, it's when she's not picking up on what he's putting down. He's like, "Well, go talk to Hiborik about this. Like, maybe he can fill you in."
Yeah. She's like, "I don't want to talk about history. Like, what are we doing here?"
Don't have any books. Where would I find them? We're mining here.
Yeah. This guy dropped on his head as a child. Like, what does he think is going on?
Yeah.
So the next section in chapter 3 is about the kind of mock fights with Coltane and trying to train up his army to protect refugees. Does anybody want to talk about that? Because I thought that was really interesting. I really enjoyed this part of chapter 3.
It's a cool thing.
Same.
I love that Corporal List keeps dying. I do think that's hysterical.
I was gonna say the second section of it, Corporal List died within the first minutes of the mock engagement, and then that just keeps getting reiterated to us that he is always the first to die every time they do it.
It's so funny.
Which makes you think that he must be a real go-getter. He must be really jumping out there in the front.
Yeah.
That's true. I didn't think of that. That's a good spin on that.
But I really like it. It really puts Coltane in a good light because it's like I think he kind of knows what's coming. Like I nobody else is, or at least some other people aren't picking up on it. But he's focusing on we're protecting refugees. That's what that's the focus of this, and not just that. He's having Culp make these refugees awful. Like it's not just dragging around a fake person. It's like, oh, they're trying to break away from me and go run off and do stupid crap, and I'm trying to protect them, and it's making it much harder because that's really what would happen.
Yeah, they're trying to bring their entire house with them. So what are you gonna do? It's yeah. I really like that. Go ahead.
I really like this section. I loved it.
Yeah. Yeah, I love how practical it is. I keep griping about how useless the interviews that we do are for the coding interviews compared to our daily jobs. It's like you have to test things on. I mean, most of the time, we end up getting tested on things that we never use in our daily job. So this seems like the right thing to train your troops on, right? Yeah. I enjoyed that section, and it had a tiny bit of humor to it too, with the corporal list and Duiker asking for a day off, and I like how things turned around with what's his name, Coltane, thinking that this is just yet another training day, but actually was it the incentive of the day off that made this happen, or did Culp just manage to convince them that this is important and let's train for it well?
I thought that's what it was. I thought that Duiker had talked to Culp and was like, "Hey, if you guys do good, you guys can, we'll talk to him about getting a day off." And that's when what does Bolt say? Like they Coltane turned it up and all they did was wilt her, and now all of a sudden they're overcoming it. What he's trying to do to them.
Yeah.
So I think it was the incentive, but
there was also the exchange between Duiker and Bolt, is it? When Coltane calls him uncle and is like, "Well, are you his uncle?" and didn't get a straight answer.
am I what? And then Duiker does not appreciate the Wiccan humor, I think is the
Yeah.
about all that.
But I love when he comes back later and calls him uncle again. And when Duiker calls him uncle. Yeah.
Oh, I missed that. That's good.
There's some good dry humor, on all of that with the Wiccans. Their sense of humor definitely, it's one of those things that it would be really easy to just like read past, and not like realize kind of what's going on and how much of what they say. Because like Erikson doesn't lampshade it. He doesn't make a point of being like, oh, these people are like making a joke. Because part of the joke is they look really serious all the time and they say everything really dryly. So it's like, it's also hard to tell when they're joking and when they're completely serious, And I love that. It's definitely something that I think hits harder on a reread where you kind of can like dig down into the nitty gritty a little more and like appreciate, Coltane's sense of humor. And it's, he's definitely a character that I am enjoying much more on this read through. Him and Bolt.
Agreed.
Yep. Somebody had a question in a previous discussion about Otataro and its origins. I think we got some discussion about it in this section with Heburik talking about how Otataro is not naturally occurring, that it could be made. And I love this part of it too, where he says, if I was less scrupulous a scholar, I'd write a treatise on that. And and somebody explains to Fellison why that's a problem. Right. He means he'd be inviting alchemists and mages to experiment in making their own Otatara. And that's a problem because this whole island had to melt to make those veins. And so the problems that they created by trying to make Otatara in the past, maybe.
Yeah, we don't know where Otataro came from, but Heborek already introduced the idea that it's not natural. It was somehow created, and Heborek, doesn't want to bring that up because then people might try to make it, and things might happen.
I also like this throwaway line. Limestone is just the bones of things once living. I mean, it's not throwaway. How casually that's stated. And it's true, right? But
Since the humor was brought up, there's something that I struggle with this series is the humor because it's very droll and dry. And that's my kind of humor, but sometimes I have trouble knowing when they're joking and when they're being serious. So I'm still adjusting to that, to know when they're joking around.
And it is very different kinds of humor too, though. Like with Krupp, we had the humor of him never shutting up. The banter of the bridge burners had a completely different character to it. And the quality of the jokes between Duiker and Coltane's gang that we just discussed, it's slightly drier than the Marines stuff. And Iskar Alpast, whom I guess we haven't yet seen in full glory, but he's one of my favorite characters.
Yeah, he gets much funnier further along. But I think you get a taste of it, right? Where like his character is so part of the joke with him is like you laugh at him, but it's also unclear how much he's in on the joke or if he is just genuinely like crazy and weird. Kind of like Krupp in that way. They're very different but very similar in some ways. And I love his Scarlpust. It's like what
I I will urge you to keep reading, Steve. I think probably book 5 is. I think there's a pair of characters in book 5 that get introduced where I think the humor becomes a lot less dry and a lot more just over the top. And I feel like Erikson never really walks it back after that.
For as incredibly dark and disturbing as this series gets, it's also one of the funniest series I've read in terms of epic fantasies. Like it does get really freaking funny. And I'm there with Shannon. They're not the only duo, but they're probably the funniest duo, and it's just chef's kiss. Just
the humor gets cranked up as the series goes along, I think. But yes, at the beginning here, it is very dry.
Yeah, Erikson is up there for me with Woodhouse and Pratchett and Douglas Adams. And yeah, I'd put him on that list of my favorite writers of comedy. But
Joe Abercrombie.
Oh, I haven't read
praise.
Abercrombie. No.
I haven't read Abercrombie either. I have 6 of his books sitting on my bookshelf I haven't read.
Oh,
so one day.
One of my favorites.
One day, yes.
I love him. Very, very funny. One of the best parts of his work is just how...
I'm sure I will love him when I get around to it.
Yeah. If you like that kind of like sarcastic, wry, biting British sense of humor, Abercrombie is a master of it. It's so good.
I like that. I think that's precisely what I like. Every humor... What is the term? Comedy writer, that's what I say. But anyway, all of them are British, I think. Yeah, except Erikson. So
Erikson does.
Welcome to the next read through after Malazan. We'll do First Law.
Yeah,
in 4 years.
Exactly.
In 4 years.
Half a decade from now. No, I actually think Erikson has a very British sense of humor. Like that is one thing. His stuff like. That I don't know. That's something.
Isn't he British? He lives over there, isn't he?
No, he has lived in the UK before, but he's
okay.
He is. He and Esselmont are both Canadian.
Okay.
Yep. But meanwhile,
yeah, no, I mean, great stuff. I love the series sense of humor, and yeah, we're still only getting a little taste of it. It's definitely, like Shannon said, much more explicit and more absurd.
Well, Varsha brought up Ishkarl Pust, and that's also here.
Let's talk about
he's. I mean, I loved that scene where he told Mappo the directions down the hallway.
Yes.
And he gives him all these crazy paces, and then Mappo just looks at him. He's like, "Okay, so 19 paces, right?" And just the way they're looking at the way it's described just cracked me up. Like the way they're looking at each other.
Yes,
that was so funny.
Yes, he feels like the person for whom the word cattywampus was invented. I imagine him standing slightly slanting. I don't know why. For some reason, now I'm thinking about it in connection to that word. And he's always tilted in my head. And for some reason, wearing a conical hat, but we'll not go there.
I definitely imagine him as like kind of hunchback. Like maybe not like literally a hunchback, but kind of always hunched over, you know, and very like kind of scraggly and like with long nails and
muttering to himself.
Yes. I love Ishkarl Pust. He's
just mean. He's so mean.
He's the worst. Talk about unpleasant. Yeah.
Well, he's Shadowstone's priest, so yeah, he should be the worst.
I do feel like if you're going to be aspected to House Shadow, like you have to have a sense of humor. You know, Cotillion is like the most serious we've seen, and we actually haven't fully gotten in to how much of a sense of humor he has. Also, while we're on this note, I'm so relieved that we can finally not talk around it and just be very explicit, because in this section, they confirm that Cotillion and Aminos are, you know, the Emperor,
Melonvet is Shadow Throne, and Dancer is Cotillion.
Yes, thank you. Yes.
Yes.
They have so many names. I
Yes.
forget sometimes which
Seriously.
is them before they ascended and which is them after. I mean, Shadow Throne, obvious, and the rope, right? But yes, that deadly dynamic duo is in fact the one that ascended, which is one of those things where like if you didn't catch it ahead of time, if you look back, it's actually like incredibly obvious. Like they talk around it all the time. And it's one of those things where it's like, isn't it so weird how these two new deities appeared right after the emperor and his best friend died? Like, isn't that so weird? And everything started
No.
changing, and they have a special grudge against Lysine and the Malazan Empire. Isn't that so weird?
Mistaken that Fiddler was in that conversation where they discussed that.
No, he
But
is.
now it's like it's a realization even for him. I thought when we were reading, like rereading Gardens of the Moon, that Fiddler and the others had guessed this. They
I don't think so.
came to this brink, but they didn't explicitly state it. But I thought they had come to that conclusion by then. But now it seems Fiddler's having this realization on our behalf. But
That's what I'm saying is I think they just talk around it the entire time.
Yeah.
None of them ever make
I
the
think they talked around it, and we had that revelation. Like
Yes.
I think as the readers, like we pretty much all understood it, but I don't think the characters ever actually did until it's really specifically pointed out in this book.
Hmm. Interesting. I think I didn't, my first time around, I didn't realize it in book one. It made sense to me in book two. The part that especially made sense to me was I couldn't understand. I was sure that I knew of cotillion as a dance, but I was sure it had to mean something else for a guy to be named cotillion. Why? And it finally made sense to me when they explained that his name was Dancer. That's why this guy's cotillion.
I had never thought about that. That's interesting. Oh, wow. Yeah. That had never I had never made that connection. That's interesting, Varsha. I even did cotillion. That's so funny. Wow. I just was like, oh, fantasy name, cotillion. Yeah, sure. You know, the other guy's Ominos. Like, why not?
I hadn't read enough fantasy for things like dances to be to be names, and for me to just like be okay with that. I needed an explanation, and I think I'm trying to remember how recently I had watched Gossip Girl before I read Malazan, because that's where I know cotillion from.
Yeah,
And
just in case anyone isn't aware, cotillion is a type of dance. It is a type of dance. It's like a very formal social dance. And yeah, now this is crazy. I can't believe all this time. Like that's like a joke in and of itself, and that I
Wow.
didn't realize. Like it's very on the
I
nose.
think I read this like way back in the day. I think maybe I was reading the Tor read along like the first time I read it, but I remember knowing this right from the get go.
Yeah, no, that was
That's
not
funny.
one that ever connected with me. Out of all the books and how many times they call him cotillion and dancer, and I just like never like I was just like, yeah, like that's just a fantasy name. Like his name's just cotillion. Like yeah, sure, you know, that's crazy.
that's funny.
This is one of the things I actually had spoiled for the series. Like when I was starting early on, there's one other thing that happens in the next book that I had spoiled for me. Right when I started Malazan the first time through. But this was one of the major things, and it's so I have never actually gone through the series without knowing that these two were who they were. It has informed every reading, so I'm curious what it. I mean, I guess that a question for you in retrospect, Varsha. I mean, it's been a while, but what was it like for you reading this reveal the first time and like looking back on everything that happened in Gardens of the Moon with that context?
I think, well, I already talked about the part where the name connection made sense. That honestly was more satisfying for me than the reveal about 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 the fact that these two were ascended. But I thought that was really cool. Like I I don't know if it yeah. I like when someone's supposed to be dead but is revealed to be alive in ways that you don't expect. Like not not when obvious hints are dropped, like, oh, their bodies were never found, like clearly hinting later on. Like they tell us now that the bodies were never found, right? When they have that realization, they don't just drop a hint earlier saying their bodies were never found. So of course they're going to come back in some form. So I like how sort of organic the reveal was, and then their hatred towards Lassine made sense, I think. So yeah, those were all the check boxes. This was one of my, oh, that's so cool moments for me in this book. But again, I suspect about 90% of that was because of the name.
That's so funny. This is also one of my favorite tropes of the secretly alive. You know, you think you're told they're dead, you think they're dead, and then they come back in an unexpected way. And especially if the unexpected way is they're revealed to be a character you've had around you the entire time. You know, where and especially if that character has been mysterious the entire time, and you're like, oh shit, duh, like it was right there the entire time, and it adds such an interesting context to all that you've read previously. I love it. A Song of Ice and Fire has this a couple times, you know. It's just a great trope.
Yes. And I think this series does that really well. Sorry, Shannon, go ahead.
Now, Steve, I remember, I think last time we talked, or the time before, you talked about how you like dead people staying dead. How does this revelation affect, how did you feel about this?
Be honest with you, I kind of didn't catch it. There's so many names and so many characters that I kind of lost track. I knew that it was meaningful in some way, but it just like sailed over my head. So yeah, I'm having it. And then not only are there a ton of characters, but they also change their names several times.
It is true.
And they're known by more than one name. So it's hard to keep up. It's hard to keep with all
Those
these
two
names.
in particular have like 4 or 5 names. Like we haven't even heard all of their names yet. Like they have like their original names that I don't think we've been introduced to yet. It's crazy. But that's I don't know. That's a true. I'm a big sucker for names like being very meaningful and characters taking different names at different. Dune does this with Paul, its main character, and it's something I like. I guess, I mean, going off of that, what you're saying, Steve, then how, like, now that we're talking about it, and if you noticed it on this time through, like, what was the impact, and what are your thoughts and feelings about it?
Kind of, not a whole lot. I just, okay, that's the person, that's the same person. It just like, okay. And then there's a few things, there's a couple of, we talked about I have it written down, about the ritual in chapter 4 with Duiker, Culp, and Sormo. That whole, I think it was around then that it's revealed. I think it's right around there. And I was trying to understand what was going on with the ritual. And I know it's somehow important because he talks about, somebody says 7 and then it gets interrupted, and it felt very important. Like it's foreshadowing for something. And then a demon appears, but it helps them escape. So all that was going on around the same time. So I'm just trying to keep up here.
Well,
yeah. I mean, sure. You wanted to talk about this ritual. What do you?
Yeah, I was gonna say, let's transition.
What do you got?
Yeah, I think I remember being very confused my first time around.
Yeah.
I think I understood it a little bit more this time. So first I want to talk about what actually happened in both places, because the path of Hans has been brought up a couple of times in these chapters, and at least one of those times was in the epigraph, I think. But I don't remember if that's from these chapters or from the previous one. But anyway, the two events, Icarium and Mapo finding an octagonal structure that is the gate to a warren, which is the path of Hans, and that I guess is the warren of soul takers and divers, which I guess we need to talk about that, what that even means. And and they're all trying to ascend. I think there is some promise of ascendancy for all of them. That's why they're all headed to a certain location. And now we find out that this may be the place that they're probably all headed towards. And maybe that explains the couple of people that couple of divers and soul taken that Icarium and Mapo ran into on their way to this temple that Shadow Throne has now taken over. And yeah, and I guess they killed a few of them on their way here. But so that's one thing. If that, like, let's talk about what the warren means, I guess. And the second bit is, did they ran the ritual. They wanted to get some information about what might happen in the future by opening up the warren of the Tilanimas, like basically the Talon warren. But to their surprise, it wasn't empty, right? That's what happened. Like a whole bunch of divers and soul taken were fighting it out there, which, given the what's the word I'm looking for? Sparseness, comparative sparseness with which Icarium and Mapo met them. Like it was one every few days, and now there's a whole host of them at a random place that they opened the warren in. So I guess that warren must be rife with these guys. So they're all trying to get to maybe that place in the temple with through the Talon warren, right? Is that an approximate? And I know for those of us who've read this before, we got some clarifications from sort of on the pagechewing forum, but I'm trying to not discuss that stuff because we don't know it yet. But yeah, so given what we know at this moment, is this summary accurate, I guess?
The only thing that I would push back against, and maybe I misunderstood something, is I don't think they go to Talon.
Who? During the ritual? Did they not open up the warren to Talon?
I thought they actually went to the Elder Warren of, which we don't know the name of yet, of the path of, where the Path of Hands leads to, the Elder Warren of the divers and soul taken.
Oh, so Sormo thinks that it is an ancient warren, and he guesses that it's Talon, but maybe it's not. No, but then they have a conversation afterwards where he thinks that the Talon warren is empty, and that's why all the divers and soul taken are using it to travel.
Okay, I don't remember that. You may be right. What I remember is
Varsha might be onto something. I didn't catch this when I was reading it, but my foreknowledge is kind of telling me she's actually onto something here. So Talon would... So maybe Talon has something to do with the diverse and soul taken. Okay, maybe. Well, I'll have to put that in my back pocket moving forward.
Yeah, there is another warren though, because like that's what Icarium and Mappo at the Shadow Temple see this, mural on the wall or drawing on the wall, whatever it is, of it's like, a jungle with four-legged beasts, and they sense that they're connecting to a warren that is an elder warren, but it's no elder warren they recognize. And I think Icarium says, at first he's like, I think it's like Talon, but it's not Talon, which is maybe why I then translated that into they weren't actually in Talon, they were in this other warren. But I may have been mixed up different things there.
No. I don't know exactly what you're talking about, but I think we'll have to have a discussion after the recording, though, because I'm curious to what you're talking about, Carl. Like, I'm not totally sure, but you know something I don't know.
Well, I don't know that I do either. That's
or that I've forgotten.
I am also confused because I don't remember the conversation with Sormo about Talon, but I do remember the conversation with Mappo and Icarium, where again they're in the Shadow Temple and they find that it actually opens not into Curled Ghislaine, which is the Elder Warren of Shadow, but into, or Elder Warren of Darkness, excuse me, which they initially thought, but into, another Warren entirely. It's no Elder Warren they recognize, but they do know it's an Elder Warren. It has the feel, it's ancient. And because of all the beast imagery and where this story is going and what is happening, my thought was this is the Elder Warren of the shapeshifters, the soul take and the divers, who I do want to say, we maybe mentioned it last episode, they spell it out in the books, and I remember commenting about how obvious it seemed in hindsight, but just in case anyone who's listening isn't following, soul taken turn into one animal, divers turn into multiple animals. But they're all kind of connected. It's just divers are like the more powerful version of the shapeshifters. And their power is in some way connected and rooted to this Elder Warren that has been forgotten about by effectively everyone we're following, and is the root of their power. And that's why they're going to try to travel to it to access the core of their power, to ascend, which is a vague term that we never get fully defined, but essentially is like becoming a higher level being, right? It's like turning level 20 in Dungeons and Dragons. It's just becoming like a demigod. But in terms of the actual ritual, I guess, I don't know. I thought they had just crossed over and like touched upon that other Warren, but maybe they were in Talon. But how did they get into Talon then? Because they were just in the gateway?
I think he was trying to... Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no. What were you going to say, Varsha?
I was going to say, I think he was trying to conduct a ritual that would open a warren that was possibly active there. And Sormo guessed that it was Talon, but now I found the section that you're referring to, Carl, where Akarium and Mappa have this conversation about the flavor of it having... It had a feeling of an Elder Warren, like Dark or Talon, but it wasn't any of those, so it's the Path of Hands. So it's possible that Sormo thinks that it is the Talon Warren they went into, but it is the Path of Hands instead. But if that is true, then what is up with this gate? Is that if they're all trying to make their way to the gate, then is that them trying to enter the Warren or get out of it?
No, enter.
So then they can't, if they're trying to enter, and that means they aren't already there. Or did a bunch of people already enter through this gate? I mean, not this gate here, because we haven't seen anyone.
My understanding is they're trying to enter through a gate that takes them into the Warren that is the center of their power. So I'm with you on that, but it does, based on what I was saying, sound like they maybe were already there. But I thought they were in our world, or not our world, but like the world where most of the action takes place, where the Malazan Empire exists, where the humans are, generally, when the ritual, like when they got attacked. But maybe I misunderstood that they were in a different Warren at that point too. And
yeah, I think if I read that correctly, they were in a Warren. And they had to pull Sormo out, I think slap him so that, or punch him so that he'd stop, like not continue with the ritual, so that the opening can be closed, whatever it was, to that place. So yeah, it seems unlikely to me that they are already in the Path of Hands, unless there's more than one gate. But the gate that we know of is there, and we haven't seen a whole horde of these creatures show up there in Past's temple. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know that particular specific matters just yet, but that ritual was confusing as hell the first time I read it. But I think I made more sense of it now.
And the demon came from Culp, right? Culp summoned the demon? Or did
I think
Sormo
so.
and Nath summon the demon? That's one thing that has never been clear to me, and is still not clear to me. And all the sense because when I first read it, I was like, there's this demon out of nowhere and it's protecting them, but I think one of them summoned it. I think it was Culp, but I'm not positive about that.
Or did it just show up and give... I don't... Was it summoned or was it just there?
Is it just there? See, that's when I first read it, but I thought, like, surely that's not the case. Surely one of them summoned it and it protected them, and this demon didn't just decide to show up and do this altruistic act of kindness for them, you know?
Mm.
But maybe I'm wrong about that.
Yeah, I didn't even remember that there was a demon in that scene, but now that you mention it.
I mean, that's
Yeah,
like the reason
here
to
it
get
is.
out, is the demon basically takes on the bugs.
Duiker saw that an enormous demon had entered the clearing.
Like, to him, it comes out of nowhere, but I wasn't sure if it
Yeah, I don't know.
actually came out of
It's
nowhere or if it was summoned.
Do you think it's part of Sormo's summoning that this is the demon he wanted to talk to, but they ended up getting attacked by a whole bunch of creatures that they did not expect?
Yes, that sounds right. I mean, I certainly think they definitely didn't expect all of the shapeshifters.
Yeah. And he's yelling to Culp that the demon's warning us. So if Culp summoned the demon, I assume he might be more aware of what's going on, but Duiker seems to have warned Culp to get them out of there. So I don't know. I don't know what the demon did.
yeah, I'm not sure who summoned it. It's all we hear is it just showed up. So
Yeah. But that demon also has a description, like we're supposed to know what it is, or that we might need to recognize later on. Like twice the height of a man and midnight skinned. Have we seen it before, or maybe we need to keep an eye on it for... Wait, is it the apt that
No,
helped
no,
Kalam later on?
I
No,
don't. It
right?
doesn't sound like an apt
Okay.
no, it's
because we get a
definitely
good
not.
description of apt in the next chapter, and
That's true.
no,
And at the moment, it must have been protecting Shaik. What an anticlimax that. Should we move on to that section?
so chapter 5.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about Gadana's ban
Let's
Oh,
do it.
yes.
and everybody showing up there. And first of all, Fiddler's horse is my MVP for maybe this book.
Yes.
Like some guardsman, spits at it, hooves, and it bites off his face.
It's
I'm like,
crazy.
what in the world? This horse is insane. And then what happens later on when they're actually in the city? Like, wow. Like, I know Fiddler's a sapper, and I mean, but damn, this horse is badass. So I love the horse. But what I really wanted to talk about was what's happening in Gadana's ban, which we see the whirlwind. I guess the uprising has started early in this city. They were
Mhm.
impatient, and it's horrible. I mean, it's just absolutely horrible. I mean, we get descriptions of old men and children dead, and just I mean, I know this is going to be uploaded on YouTube, so I'm going to try to mind my language a little bit. But women being assaulted. I mean, it's kind of like, should I be rooting on these people for wanting to uprise? Because this is worse than what they had. Like the outside colonists came in, which then led into the whole discussion you were talking about earlier, Varsha, about with Cotillion and everything, and they're basically Cotillion. Well, Absalar lays the blame on Lysine for what happens with the IMAS. But it's like, I don't know, man. Like, these people are so horrible. Like, this uprising is terrible. It's like, I want to support them in uprising against these colonists, but I don't know. I can't, because they're just raping. Well,
That's fine.
assaulting and being
I
awful.
mark these episodes explicit anyway. It's fine. So we don't have to worry about any of that.
Okay.
What was I saying? Yeah, it is interesting, isn't it? Like, you are uprising for a cause, but on the way to getting there, somehow you lose sight of what it is that you're fighting against, and maybe not even become the thing you hate, apparently become much worse than that, or become a vehicle of hate so evil that you wouldn't even check to see whether what you're hurting is actually the thing that you hate. Like when Fiddler points out that the girl that they are hunting is not even Malazan. So what are you after? Like you're not even, and not that if their anger had been directed at an actual Malazan girl, it would have been any better. But even I think that's so, just the lack of that distinction makes that scene that much more powerful and intense, that they're willing to go to these lengths. And for what? Who, if they're going to be the people in power, it's not going to be a better world. So yeah, just
I think on that note, like this is a direct parallel to what happens earlier in the novel with the Red Blades just massacring people indiscriminately and children getting kidnapped in the chaos, and Fiddler saves the two little girls, right, and takes them to the mage. I forget what his name is within the culture. Like this didn't fully click with me until I'm saying it now out loud, but like it's like the same thing. Like it's this indiscriminate massacre to kind of make a point, and children are getting hurt because of it, right? It's this like, you know, it's like, I think it's easy, you know, and the easy example I always think of, you know, I think maybe because this is kind of how it was taught to me growing up, is the French Revolution, where it's these great noble ideals, and you're like, yes, like overthrow, you know, the shitty monarchy, but then you become even worse than the thing you're fighting because you get so caught up in the bloodshed, and then it's all, you know, Jacobins turning on Jacobins, and you know, everyone, you know, it's all ideological purity tests that no one can live up to, and so it really just becomes all about power and who has power in the moment, and, you know, surrendering to the will of the mob, and inevitably within that, that means that like children are left vulnerable and they are harmed, you know, in any number of ways. They're harmed, like Fellison has been harmed, and in worse ways, and you know that there is really no difference, I think, between the colonizing army and the army rising up against them, at least in terms of how the children are being affected, right? And I keep kind of pointing to children, not only because I think that's one thing that universally people will react to, but also because there is a quote, a very famous quote, famous within like fans of the series, about, you know, children dying, that we'll get to in a later book. Or
I
is
thought
it
that
this
was
book?
this book. I think it's this
Is it
book.
this book? Okay, well, it's
I
coming
think
up
so.
then. So that's a point then. Then that's a
Yes.
thematic point, right? Is that regardless of who is doing the violence, because of their wanton violence, because they have no control, you know, and I guess there was the question of if you can't control it, children are dying, children are being hurt.
Well, and I think it also brings up the idea that there's always people willing to work in bad faith of any
Yes,
cause.
absolutely.
You know, like I'm sure there are people part of this whirlwind that are legit and honest and true, and they just want the Malazans out. And then there's also people that are willing to take advantage of the chaos that happens, and that's the guys we meet in this chapter that that are
Absolutely.
running after that girl.
On that note, God, I keep saying that. Shaik to me seems like, and Leoman for that matter. I'm not going to comment on the Toblakai yet, but Leoman and Shaik seem like true believers, like where they genuinely are like, this is our culture, like we're going to rise up. And Shannon, you made a face.
I'm not going to say anything yet
Yeah,
because
yeah.
I've read some Esselmont books.
Okay, touche.
But yes, um, I'm willing to agree that Shaik is absolutely a true believer. In fact, I want to ask a question. Did anybody think that she saw her death coming?
No,
You don't think so? You think she just saw herself opening a book and the whirlwind was going to happen, and
I think
she
she had
didn't know
a
that she was going to have to
vision.
die to be part of that?
I think she had a vision that she misunderstood.
Okay,
Kind of
very
classic.
possible.
You know, I think the fortune telling in this series, when it is genuinely magically being done, is, and this isn't unique to Malazan, but is in the eye of the beholder, right? Where you're given a prophecy and it is so easy to misunderstand that prophecy or to make it happen through your own actions, right? I think this series very much falls within that vein, right? Because that's where the drama comes from, right? And I love the way, it is an anticlimax, right, Varsha, where your expectations are subverted in such a fun, interesting way, where it's all built up and it happens surprisingly fast. And you're like, holy shit, the apocalypse is about to start. The whirlwind's coming. And then she's just sniped in the face immediately. Like that's awesome.
Yep.
And now we're left
Opens
to
the
deal with
book.
fallout.
I know it's horrible, but it's things like this that make me laugh out loud when they happen because there are so many movies where my husband and I watch and are like, yeah, this is the scene where it should have ended because this guy's being stupid as fuck and he should have been hit by the bus and we should have ended the movie within 5 minutes.
Yes. So true, though.
And I'm going to say, in support of Carl, Leoman said, after she's dead, he's like, okay, well, let's cover up. Let's stay here. Maybe something's about to happen. So maybe he is a true believer because his actions showed that at least in that moment he was. Because he was like, oh, something's going to happen. She opened the book. It was dawn, and I forget the exact phrasing of it. But,
yeah. I like
he clearly
Go
seemed to
ahead.
think something was, we're just going to wait and see what happens.
Yeah. I like how they reinterpret her prophecy in real time. They're like, oh, she said she's going to be renewed. Maybe we should sit down and wait
That was
here.
it. Renewed.
But I like that.
Yeah, she's going to be renewed.
Yeah.
It's just a flesh wound. She'll get better.
And she does seem to be. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go.
She seems to be exuding some sort of power, and there is also Drishna, the whirlwind goddess, right? We don't know what role the goddess is going to play, so maybe there's some sort of how do I say this without spoiling anything? She thinks she's going to be renewed. Like maybe she's thinking about the apocalypse and like the visions she saw were about an entity or like the abstract of the apocalypse. I'll shut up now and we'll talk about this afterwards. I don't know how to say it without spoilers.
I also want to say for anyone listening, it occurs to me, because they're not going to be able to see this. Steve went to bed, by the way, so we're not just ignoring Steve. If anyone is like curious, like what does Steve think about all this? Like he went to bed. But anyway, that's sidebar.
That sounds like that's what Steve thinks about all this. He went to bed. That's what
he was like, I'm done. No more of them. I can't blame him for it, one thing I did want to talk about that occurred to me as we have been discussing is, I have to give kudos to you, Varsha, for, these books are so thematically rich. And when we were reading Gardens of the Moon, you were the first person who really tried to kind of dig into like, well, what's the symbolism of the gods and the magic and, the getting into the puppets on strings of everything and, the thematics behind control and free will and all those sorts of delicious things. And that became a big part of our conversations. And as we were discussing, it occurred to me that, we've been talking a lot about violence and instinct and just savagery. And, what is a savage? What within a human is savage? How do we even define savage or bestial? Animal is maybe the word that comes to mind, and that you may then piece together that what I'm getting at is the path of hands is a very explicit, as these symbols often are when you dig down into them, thematic point. It's a symbol. This whole book is talking about the savagery of human beings, like how we are at our core animals, and that means we are capable of great violence, and I think great nobility too. But that there is this bloodthirst and this capacity to just kill or be killed, conquer others and to mate, and the competition of the wild, right? I mean, that's kind of what the Path of Hands is just the competition of the wild manifested in its purest form. And we're seeing that in the revolution, the rebellion too, where it's all of these religious beliefs, all of these noble ideals that really, when it comes down to it, is about who's on top of the food chain, and how many people am I going to have to kill to get on top of the food chain. And so whether you're the Malazans with the red swords, or you're the whirlwind, you're colored red, right? You're covered in blood. And I think that's what the red symbolism is really all about, is that everyone's got blood on their hands. They're all at the core, they're all full of blood. They're red-blooded, animals who their first instinct, right, is to go out of their way to kill or be killed. And we're seeing that play out in just tragically. It's a tragedy at its core, I think, about, the violence innate to the human condition under extreme circumstances. When you put, our assets to fire, it's so easy for us to act like animals.
That is quite a fantastic observation, I think, especially when you think about the depiction of the two bits of violence that we got, at least two bits of violence that we got in these chapters. I guess the viciousness of the attacks of the divers and the soul taken between each other in that very brief glimpse we got of them. And comparing that to what goes down in Gdanis barn when Fiddler and co get there, I think, yeah, that intensity, the animal intensity of that, it's easy to think that this one, the Path of Hands one, is maybe worse than the other in terms of just how violent it is, but this one is the lack of humanity in the other one, I think, is far more chilling. And to see them, I guess, side by side, that makes a lot of sense. I really like that observation. That's brilliant.
It's, I have a greater appreciation on these read-throughs for the thematic depth of the novel. Particularly as we go along, there's a lot of kind of navel gazing, and I say that in sort of an ironic way, because I enjoy reading about like the philosophical tangents in this series, and I think they are one of the highlights of the series for me, and are often, they changed the way I view the world and challenged me, and I love that. I love when fiction does that, but I think it goes beyond. I'm seeing in these early books, it goes beyond just the kind of explicit dialogue where the characters are actively talking about the themes, down to the actual actions and the symbolism that the pages are rife with, in a way that I think it's easy to skirt over. I think we've talked about this before, but like someone could like write a master's or a doctorate on this series, with just how much thematic depth there is, and how much symbolic language there is used, and the way metaphor is used, and the way the characters change, and what that kind of Erikson is saying through the characters. And like it was crazy when we were talking, and it just like clicked for me, that the way all of this symbolism is being employed, and the way that, again, I think the color red is being employed. Like, it's not a coincidence that both sides, red is their like primary color, of kind of the political sides, and then you have this kind of group of people who are heroes, effectively, who Duiker is one of our, lead. I mean, really all of our POVs who are not aspected in that red color, right? Because in some ways they are the real nobility of the human condition, like fighting to get through amidst all of, the two whirlwinds of blood, that are clashing, just beginning to clash as we begin this.
There was some whirlwind.
I just
Go ahead, sorry.
Oh, well, just real quick, I don't want to say, Carl, you just blew my mind when you had mentioned how this book is about kind of the animal nature of man. And then also combine that with the Path of Hand storyline that runs through it, where we've got
Exactly.
these animals,
Yeah.
people turning into animals, trying to attain godhood. And it's like, wow, I think that is a major theme of this entire book that I never picked up on before.
And it's literally, they're just trying, it's the food chain, right? Like, it's which one of them is going to be the top alpha predator. That's the entire thing. And again, credit to you guys. Like, I only thought about this because of the conversations you guys were having. You know, that it's fucking Steven Erikson, man. Like, he really thought this through. You know, it's the same thing Gardens of the Moon, which like often gets kind of criticized as being the weakest book in the series. And you know, I think for all the criticism you can throw at it, like there's real thought and real intelligence going on in that book. You know, as I think we unpacked in some of our conversations. You know, he's really exploring interesting topics about you know, the strings that we all live by. You know, the way that we all kind of function as marionettes. In different ways, and now I think in this book he really is kind of talking about the animal nature within us, and it's everywhere, right? Like once you start looking at it, you're like, oh, that's the entire book. Like that's what this whole thing is about. You talk about Fellison, you know, and we haven't fully gotten into it yet, but I think when you get into Icarium too, there's a lot going on there. But certainly that whole storyline is mysterious at this point, so we won't dig too deeply there. But I do want to maybe talk about it a little more, about kind of what's going on there at the Temple of Shadow, and also Mappo and his mysterious backstory, as he was clearly given some task with Icarium and by the Nameless Ones, who are outside his tribe they encountered.
Yes.
And they're this mysterious group of people, the Nameless Ones.
How cool was the Nameless Ones, the introduction to them? They seemed really mysterious.
Yes, they are. They are like peak mysterious in this series. They're just very enigmatic. I mean, that's their name, right? The Nameless Ones. Like that's just a giant question mark, right?
Yeah, and they apparently brought Mappo along to give him a task, which may be related to Icarium or seems to precede his time with Icarium somehow. Sorry, Shannon, were you going to say something?
No.
And then, of course, we have the Bocarala, who are adorable. Just little shit-flinging monkeys, you know, flying monkeys. I love them.
They keep... so Moby came back. Crocus lost him last time, and now he's back. Yeah. All hurt and injured.
Moby got lucky.
Yeah.
We find out.
Oh, interesting.
Yes. Yeah.
I thought you meant got lucky as in he was lucky to be alive.
No. It's just Crocus doesn't know about Booklikai and mating practices.
Yeah, talk about animal instinct, right?
Yes.
That is one of those like crazy, like hilarious reveals where it's like, oh no, like this is how they do the dirty. Like,
oh no, he got hurt. Well,
yeah,
that was funny.
We talked about Fiddler and his horse Upsalar and her hidden powers, that like she can still channel parts of Cotillion, apparently. That was an interesting reveal for this section.
Yes.
We haven't seen much of her. We've only seen her from a distance. And I didn't remember this at all from the first time, but Fiddler's slowly but surely trying not to fall in love with her.
I know, I'd forgotten all about it. I guess I wanted to forget all about it.
Yeah.
Because that's definitely the thing that like...
use it the first time either.
Hurts me. I'm like reading, I'm like, oh God, like Fiddler, no. It's a really interesting like character choice. Like I think it says a lot of like very... Like this poor man is like so sad and so lonely, and like he has not had female company in who knows how long, and so he's developing these frankly gross feelings about this teenage girl he's traveling with, and it's just like, oh, I cringe.
But in defense of Fiddler, did anybody else want to like punch Croaker when he was insulting Fiddler and calling him a
little bit.
ditch digger and
for sure.
how old he was. I was like,
Yeah, I
you
actually
little
was.
jerk, shut up.
I was wondering about that. So Crocus is what, about 20, and Fiddler in
No. Crocus is like 16.
16. Okay.
I was gonna say, I don't think he's that old.
No,
Yeah.
he's a teenager. We like found like he's like very explicitly like he's like maybe a little older than Fellison.
Okay. So okay,
Yeah, but he's
a
about the same
teen.
age as Absolar.
Okay.
All right.
And I
They're
think so.
17 at old, like at the
Okay.
oldest.
And Prologue Fiddler was Gardens of the Moon. Prologue Fiddler was a teenager or late teens, and it's been
That's
what,
right.
7 or 8 years since then, right? Thereabouts. I think Paran is early 20s or something, right? So at
What you're
most,
telling me is Fiddler's in his 20s?
I thought so. So what the heck is Crocus going on about him being long in the tooth?
That actually makes it, one, if you're right, less creepy. Still a little weird, but definitely a lot less creepy.
Yeah.
But two, holy shit, this guy is treated like he's ancient.
Yeah.
And
Why
in
is
my
that?
head, I think he's like so old. But if he's like my age, like I'm
Yeah.
27. Like, is this guy 27 years old? That's crazy.
In this book.
I thought Fiddler was at least in his, like, I don't know, late 30s or something.
Yeah.
Wow.
I
Is he
don't
only
think
20
so.
something?
War fucking ages you, damn.
Because I remember being very surprised at, like, and you're right, I throughout my first read, Fiddler was an old man practically since we met him. But Gardens of the Moon, when we were rereading the prologue, Paran, unless Paran is wrong and he only looks like he's a teenager at the time of the prologue, I don't know.
He's like a reverse Tom Cruise. That's crazy. he aged like 30 years in 5 years. That's okay. I'm going to the freaking prologue now. I luckily have this book. I'm going to find Fiddler and I'm going to see if you're right that this is going to completely change my entire view of the story. Like I have it Fiddler in my head is like late 30s at youngest, you know. Like it's definitely made clear that he like aged poorly because war is hard, but that's crazy.
Okay, well. A little AI tells me that, Ganos Perrin, who is around 12 years old, perceives Fiddler as being only a few years older than himself. However, later in the series, Fiddler is described as an older man with gray in his beard and a certain far-off look in his eyes. So, yeah, he
What
was
if time
only a
passes
few
during
years
the
older
series?
than Perrin, yet war aged him, I guess.
Yeah. It's a lot of time passes in these books, so him as an older man later makes sense. But right now, he's not
Not
old.
older.
No,
He can't possibly be older than like 30.
that's
Yeah. No, you're right.
Yeah.
Kids, I mean, like if you think realistically about kids, like a 12-year-old kid is much more likely to overestimate someone's age.
Mm.
Like I think about like when I'm 12 and like 18-year-olds seemed like ancient to me.
Mm.
You know, like when I looked at them and I look at them now and I'm like 18-year-olds are babies. But
Yeah.
you know, but like it's that's just one of those weird things about age. And I would believe like he's probably right. He probably looked at him and was like, that's it, that's an older teenager, you know?
Mm.
I at oldest, like probably 18 or 19, which means yeah, he is no older than like 27.
Right? Yeah. So Crocus is
That's
just being an ass for no reason.
insane.
Not that it would have
Which
been okay to say he's long in the tooth if he was an actual old man, but still.
which is the most like teenager shit. I mean, I guess Crocus probably does think he's older than he is,
Mm.
like I did until now. But that's wow, that is a dickhead move. this 20 max 27, 28-year-old calling him an old man is like that's crazy. Wow. Well, I hope we just gave Varsha, I hope you just gave a new appreciation to some listeners like you did to me, because that's completely fundamentally changed my entire view of Fiddler's character. And this dude acts like an old man.
Yeah.
He does act like an old man.
That's true. He does have somewhat old man thoughts. But
And he only gets crankier.
that's true.
But he's like He's, oh my God, this is crazy. This is
He's been
holy
cranky the
shit.
entire time. He was born cranky.
If we ever talk to Steven Erikson, this is one of the things I want to talk to him about, because he had to have done all of this super intentionally.
Mhm.
Whereas like he writes Fiddler, yeah, like he's just like a cranky old like vet, and he is a vet and he is cranky, but he's not that old, and it's just war freaking weighs on you.
But yeah, he has been a soldier for a long time, and I think he is one of the bridge burners. That means he went through whatever ordeal they keep referring to
Yeah.
before Paran saw him in the prologue while he was still a teenager. And the desert apparently also ages you.
Yeah,
Well,
which is definitely true.
the
All that sun
aged.
will age you.
Yeah.
I mean, your skin at least. Like you'll, you
Mhm.
know, that's why we wear sunscreen, right?
But then I guess that might reduce further our estimate of his age, because Paran saw him after Raraku and he looked only a few years older than him. Anyway, moving on. Now-
Spoiler alert, he's actually Gano's age. That would be crazy if he's like 21 this entire time and he just looks, 20 years older. That I wonder if we can pin down, if we can talk to Steven Erikson, if we can pin down an age, if he will tell. Knowing him, with the interviews I've seen, there's no way. He'll be like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know how old he is. You tell
Don't
me.
know.
What do you think?
Yeah. What do you think?
Which I respect, but also I am now desperate. Like more than any, there's so many secrets and mysteries in this world that we don't get all the answers to, at the end of 10 books or in Esselmon's books or whatever. But this is the one I need to know. How old is Fiddler? I don't care about his name.
Forget everything else that we don't know about.
I don't care his backstory. I don't care about all the gods and magic and shit.
Yeah.
How old is Fiddler?
Yep.
I
Don't
need to
care
know.
if we never find out who the nameless ones are, but
Yeah.
please explain.
That's so crazy. Thank you for that, Varsha. This has just blew my mind and made my night. I'm like, oh my God.
Yes,
I can't believe you remembered that.
in exchange for your wonderful discussion about the nature of violence and the human beastly nature and whatnot, I give you this, Fiddler's true age.
This is way better. This is crazy. I mean, because I just have this very distinct image of Fiddler in my head, and it just got completely overturned.
So it's not creepy anymore. Thank you for the crowd listening. It is not creepy right now that Fiddler's falling in love with Upsalar. It is
No, it
kind of
makes
cute.
way more sense.
Not
Yeah,
as
it makes
creepy.
way more sense. Yeah. It's still a little bit where you're like, okay, like maybe like I don't know, and like clearly she and Crocus have everything, but like also it makes sense, right? Like he hasn't been with a woman, they're maybe a decade apart. Like they, the way, yeah, that's just wow. It's not as creepy. That's wow. I mean, because that's radically different if he's like 26 years old as opposed to like 46, like he is in my head.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Crazy.
Yes. Oh, I missed this part when Icarium and Mapo have now set out on a quest to find Escaralpa's broom. What?
Yes, legendary.
Yes. And I don't know. I can't tell at this point whether it's just an excuse to search around the castle, or like Pasta secretly Mr. Miyagi and giving them clues that will help them on their quest, or Icarium really cares about Past's broom and they are in fact going to look for it, which is
yeah, there's so much that's what is delightful about this reread is these books are so dense and there's so much that happens that there's so much I don't remember. And so I can't remember if there's a payoff to this or not. If this is just like strictly comedic, or if, Pust is actually like Mr. Miyagi is a great example, like Mr. Miyagiing them, and sending them on a quest that seems stupid, but actually like leads them towards what they're looking for. I'm
Yeah.
excited to see where this goes. I love it. That whole part I loved with the broom. So good.
Yes.
The payoff, his long extended monologue that ends with "Find my broom." Like it's so good.
Find my broom. I just noticed a reference to his broom in wait, what? Oh, yeah. So this is when Pust sends Mapo or like gives him the directions to the library, and with those crazy instructions of like turn 34 paces, then turn right again, blah blah blah. At the end of that, he's examining the broom's ragged end. So he lost it between that and when they came back, and now he wants to. Anyway, I
That's
care about
crazy.
Escaralpa's broom. I think that's my hook for the rest of this book.
Me too. What happened to the broom? I have to know. How old is
Yeah,
Fiddler?
because
Where is the broom?
Yes, exactly.
he needs that
If
broom to fight off all those spiders.
correct.
Exactly.
Yes, that's what
Yes.
he wants them to kill spiders, and he doesn't have his broom, so they need to find the broom.
They need to
So
find the broom. That's important.
yes, if we come out of this and we don't know where Escaralpa's broom is, I am going to be very disappointed.
I'm going to be furious. Plant and payoff. Come on. We got to find out.
The payoff, yes. This is what Chekhov's broom. I'm gonna steal
Chekhov's
Shannon's
broom,
line from the last book when he said Chekhov's dragon. So
There you go. Exactly. Now we got Chekhov's broom. That's good. I want to say on another just related note of the quality of Erikson's writing is I love this whole, like, chapter 5 ends with the Toblakai raised his head, sniffed, there's a storm coming. And then you flip the page and it's book 2, the whirlwind.
yes,
Amazing transition there. Amazing. I think it's easy to kind of miss that, but that's like in a movie where you have someone like, you know, like we're you know, we're going camping, and then it's like, I don't know, location switch. Like it's just a great transition.
yeah.
That I really appreciate. You know, that he just talking about craft, like the craft of that, of being very deliberate and setting that up, and it just makes the flow so smooth.
Yeah, I agree. That's quite brilliant. And on the subject of whirlwind and whirlwind related imagery and storms coming, I think chapter 4, I think, if I remember correctly, has 2 big dust clouds that are discussed. One is the one that Felicin sees because a part of the mine has caved in, apparently. And they're digging up the bodies. And then when we switch from her to Kalam is trying to escape a storm, and there is a dust cloud in his vicinity that he's trying to escape. So that, again, given the context of knowing that the next book is called Whirlwind, the sort of mini storms that are brewing here, it's quite fantastic image wise, I think.
Absolutely. Do we want to, you know, before we wrap up and do quotes, do we want to talk about Kalam briefly? You know, we talked about the end, like his ending with Shaikh and the anticlimax, and you know, obviously that ties into he's been stalked by the Red Blades and Lostar Yil, who's definitely a character to keep, you know, to remember, keep your eyes out for. But I think there are a couple other things that stand out to me, which is I'll admit, just like flat out, I think Kalam's section reading here was the stuff I was least interested in overall, with the exception of his ending with Shaikh. But we knew he was in the claw, but I don't think up until this point we knew he was a claw master. That was a reveal, I believe. Am I correct in remembering that? It all kind of blurs together.
I think so.
I know we knew he was in the claw, but I don't think we knew he was a claw master.
Interesting. I didn't realize that was a different title than just someone in the claw. I thought maybe someone in the claw is a claw master, but now that you mention it, maybe not. Maybe that's a higher rank among the claw. But also, he is no longer a claw, right? So he's kind of,
Yes.
flashing the badge when he shouldn't.
No, he's lying. Yeah. At the same time, you don't want to mess with someone who is a claw master, right? So it's like, even if he's not working for the Empire, it's like, I would be like the sergeant and be like, hands off.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. You're on a mission. You rank higher than I do. Okay. Thanks.
Yes.
Bye.
Yeah. Please drink my beer.
Yeah. I'll give you whatever you want.
Yeah, I love how I appreciate how it like very much evokes a Western atmosphere. I remember thinking that the first time I read it too, where like it feels like, the lone gunslinger walks into a bar and everyone looks his way, and there's this tense exchange, and he talks his way / shoots his way, into like getting a drink and getting a room for the night, and it just definitely had kind of that Western vibe to it, which was fun.
Yeah.
But the other thing actually I wanted to mention was the reading of the Deck of Dragons of this false seer who ends up doing a real reading, and it's all of the titles of House Death arrayed around Kalam.
And he is apparently the Herald of Death, which remind me, did we see a Herald of Death in the last maybe the last reading of the Deck of Dragons in Gardens of the Moon, but we didn't really know who to map it to?
I think we had
remember a Mason of Death. I don't remember a Herald.
Okay, Mason, I think we talked offline about who it was, and that made sense. But and like that's not going to be important for a while, but Mason is a spoiler for a later book.
Shannon, about because you hadn't joined our chats yet when I talked offline with, not to tease this to people who I'm not going to talk to, listeners, but the Mason of Death is, I think there's a very specific, like, I feel 98% confident that I am right about who it is, because it's not like one of those things where it's like, this person is the Mason of Death. Like, it's one of those, in hindsight, I think that this is who the reading is about.
I think there was a comment on that episode on the YouTube channel which agreed with you, although they don't know that they agreed with you because yes, that.
Yes, exactly. Okay, yeah, Shannon, we're on the same page. Yes.
So I was trying to remember if we saw a Herald of Death card, which is now being revealed as Kalam, or if this is sort of emerging in the story that Kalam is about to bring a bunch of death, which he did, maybe, by handing the Book of the Apocalypse. I agree with you, Carl, that Kalam was maybe the least interesting thread, albeit like quite interesting still. I liked his monologue about what he is doing, him questioning his motives and his decision to hand the book over for the apocalypse, which has a very interesting character to it, right? Because he's not like, we've seen Paran in Gardens of the Moon, and maybe some other characters here sort of bemoan the destruction they are causing, but he's not beating himself up about it because he thinks that he can stop it. So he is questioning himself a little bit, but he thinks that if he fulfills the mission that he's on right now, hopefully not much damage will come. But he doesn't seem to be too bothered if he does fail, the damage that this could, the havoc that this could wreak.
That's a great point. I think he is in a state of mind where the ends justify the means right now. And I think we're seeing that play out. And, I suspect we'll maybe see that play out a little more. And that is interesting given the end goal of his mission and who he is going up against. I think there is some interesting parallels being drawn.
Interesting. Yes. Yeah. We know what his end goal is, right?
Yeah, we know. He's going to kill Lysine.
Yeah.
He's going to the titular Deadhouse. We know that's his secret entrance into Malaz City. It's Malaz City, right? Not... Yeah, okay.
That's right.
Okay.
Okay.
Because there's the capital that's separate, and I sometimes mix up those two.
Anta is the capital?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
And Aaron
There's only
is
2
where
cities
the
on Malaz Island. I learned that this
yeah
chapter.
Oh, okay.
yeah with
So they're
Pelison being
okay.
questioned.
Fellison was talking about it. There's only 2 cities, Malaz City and then wherever she claimed to be out of.
That's right. Okay. Cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they were trying to get her to confess to being noble-born, so they
Right.
could
I
use her
remember
even
that.
more, I guess. Anyway,
Yeah. Cool.
did we leave out anything? We talked about Apsalar. The interesting thing was her assassin skills being quite intact. Thank you very much. And
That was one of the least surprising reveals to me, I have to be honest. Someone's
yeah,
possessed by a god of assassins, you're like, yeah, that something's gonna last, you
yeah,
know?
and
The thing I really appreciated was that she had his memories.
yes,
Like that
I
was
was about
something
to
that I
say.
loved seeing pay off, and how that's still like there's still an after effect, right? She's
Hmm.
still not the same girl she was before. In Gardens of the Moon, with how it ended, it seemed like she was like pretty innocent and sweet. And then now we're like, okay, not only can she murder people really easily still, but she still can just like change personality on a whim. Like she still carries his hatreds, his loves, his feelings, his memories.
Yeah. And you have to wonder how she feels about that because while not possessed, she is still haunted by his memories. Like the outrage she feels when someone thinks that Kellen would cause the destruction at Aaron is very real. And those feelings are not her own. So she must still feel somewhat used by Cotillion. So, yeah, interesting character to look out for. Who else? We
I
talked
think
about
my last
Fiddler.
thing
Sorry, go ahead.
I think my last thing is actually my quote I wanted to bring up, which was the origin of the bridge burner's name, which I did not remember at all. Like I
Mm,
just apparently blew past this my first read through, which was it says, as the wind and the sun did to the sand and the stone, Raraku shapes all that who have known it. Changing or crossing it had etched the souls of the 3 companies that would come to be called the bridge burners. We could imagine no other name. Raraku burned our past away, making all that became before us a trail of ashes. And like I said, I didn't even remember
Mhm.
that. But like that's where the name Bridge Burner came from. Like that's why
yeah.
they're called that.
They
Because
burnt the
Roroku
bridges to the
burned their
past.
past away.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
That
I
is
really like that.
awesome. I had somehow missed that again because I didn't remember
That-
that either. Wow. So
yeah.
thank you, Shannon, for sharing that. That's awesome. Great quote. That is really
Because I was
interesting.
wondering why they were Bridge Burners. That's such a weird name. Like
What
that's why.
bridges did they burn? Did they?
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
true.
even for
Yeah.
like until I got to this point. For my first time, I kept wondering why, if they set fires to bridges, they were such celebrated soldiers. Why it was a good thing that they burnt bridges, like literal bridges.
Well, I always thought of it as burning away your past, but I never really thought about the like why. Like I never made the connection. Like,
Hmm.
oh, they were shaped in Rorarku, which I did kind of know, but
Yeah.
this is where they became the Bridge Burners. Like this is where
Yeah.
they gave away their past and became who they are.
That is interesting also within the context of the whole series, and also
Yeah.
I would say the other major company that features,
Mm-hmm.
and the
Absolutely.
because that one I like I always immediately because they explain why they name the other one the thing they do, but the bridge burners,
Well, it's
it's like
because
there's
we're
an
there with
interesting
them when they name themselves. These ones we come in afterwards.
yeah, there's an interesting dichotomy there, right? That's
Yeah.
very cool.
That's cool.
The last, this isn't a quote, but I just will say to listeners, pay attention to Toblakai.
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy to read this stuff now. This is first time I read Deadhouse Gates twice before this, but this is first time reading it after reading certain other potentially
Yep.
multiple books.
And Tublakai is only 17 years old. That shocked me.
That blew my mind too. I
Yeah.
was like,
And
he's
only
17?
7 feet tall. Like I thought he was bigger than that. I don't know why.
Crazy.
But 17 years old.
All these people are children. What are we doing?
I have a question about that. We'll talk after we finish recording. But my quote, my favorite from this section is, "It would later be said that even a Graal's horse knew an insult when it saw one."
Yes.
Yes, that is great.
So does that mean that this incident with this horse biting off this guy's face was remembered, and this is the cause of that saying?
Maybe, because
Oh
I
yeah.
think
Maybe.
this was what made everyone desperately want his horse, right?
Yeah, they all wanted his horse, and then so like I feel like this is the like from the phrasing of that makes me think that this is the incident that would
Yeah,
lead to that saying.
maybe. Yeah, yeah. The interesting. Yeah, maybe it's like a now fiddler. Fiddler's the origin of a phrase, and he's not even a true Graal.
Well, Fiddler's horse. I'm not going to give
Fiddler's
Fiddler
horse.
that credit.
That's true.
That's a great point. I think that is where that saying comes from. Wow, that's cool. A quote that I, after talking what we did about Kalam in particular, I do want to highlight the epigraph of chapter 3. I think all the epigraphs have been interesting so far in this book. This one, I think, has some interesting thematic depth to it. The Red Blades were, at this time, preeminent among those pro-Malazan organizations that arose in occupied territories. Viewing themselves as progressive in their embrace of the values of imperial unification, this quasi-military cult became infamous with their brutal pragmatism when dealing with dissenting kin. It is that brutal pragmatism, and treating it. I think what is so interesting and so dangerous, as pointed out, in this book, is the way in which pragmatism can become a moral absolute, or this idea, the notion of pragmatism. It's the ends justify the means, and not just just saying, oh, that's the way I'm going to go about my life, but like believing that is the moral right? Because this is a cult that their religious belief is that this is what they need to do. Ends justify the means. Imperial unification and the peace that will follow is worth whatever carnage needs to be done leading up to it. And, I think there are a lot of interesting parallels to be drawn with different characters through that.
Is a good
Yeah.
on the subject of overarching themes across the book, right, that run through the book. Felicin comes to mind when we speak of pragmatism. Although at great harm to herself, I think, which in some sense you can apply to the Red Blades perhaps, or people who end up hurting themselves in the process of getting there. And by themselves, I mean like the people they're trying to protect, but not, are you really protecting them? It's, yeah.
And it is, I think, violence, I'm not the first person to say this, but violence against other people is often violence against the self, because it warps who you are and how you see yourself in the world. But on top of that, I think there's a pragmatic aspect. I mean, not using the word pragmatism, where it's like, I'm not going to get, too deep into real world examples, but, I will say, I think a lesson that the U.S. learned in, fighting terrorism is oftentimes, you create the monster that you say you're trying to fight. You go in and you devastate people, and you just keep bombing innocent people, and guess what? You're encouraging a lot of children to grow up and hate you and want to kill you. And so the Red Blades violence, guess what they're doing? They're creating a lot of orphans. They're creating a lot of angry kids and angry young men who are going to decide, oh, you know what the solution is? It's to rise up and to murder all the Malazans. And so it is itself self-defeating in that way, this kind of mindless destruction and violence.
And we didn't talk about him, but Tene Baralta, who we met through the head of the Red Blades, is not a very good guy.
No.
No.
Willing to pass on all of his failures to his underlings, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just real quickly, again, on the subject of overarching themes, I've heard Erikson talk about in interviews how for a particular theme, he uses multiple characters or situations to explore that theme from, so you can look at it from various angles. And on the subject of pragmatism, for instance, we've noticed at least 2 places where it applies. And I like how understanding one of them feeds into understanding the other. And I feel like that happened with Gardens of the Moon when we talked about themes of manipulation and control, how each of them helped understand the other situation a little better. So I think one of the reasons why I wanted to discuss the series is to explore these things in great detail. So this is really cool, being able to look at it from a distance on the reread and
That's a good
coming
point.
up with all of these ideas. Yeah. Oh, I have one more before we wrap up.
Please.
It's a poor scholar who trusts anyone's judgment, Tweaker said, even and perhaps especially his own. Yes.
That's a good one.
Any other quotes before we wrap up? Okay.
That's it for me.
So we'll be reading chapters 6 and 7 for next week. If you're reading along with us, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next week. Bye.